The grand chamber of the Galactic Battle Council floated in the darkness of space. It was a massive station, shaped like a ring, spinning slowly at the edge of the Orion Spur. Inside its walls, representatives from 47 different species had gathered for an emergency meeting. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of a dozen different atmospheres mixing together. High Admiral Eth stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, even by standards, with a hard black shell covering his body and 4 arms folded behind his back. His compound eyes reflected the light of 1,000 stars through the viewing windows. The Empire was the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. They had conquered 37 worlds. They had never lost a war. And today, Eth had been given a simple task: decide if humanity was worth saving. The hegemony of had declared war on the human colonies 3 days ago. 14 small worlds, scattered across an unremarkable corner of space. 10 billion humans in total. They wanted their territory, their resources, and their complete surrender. The question before the council was simple: should anyone help them? Eth activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. Images of humans appeared in the air, rotating slowly so all delegates could see. Soft skin, no natural armor, no claws, no venom glands, no psychic abilities. They lived for less than a century, which was considered tragically short by galactic standards. Some species in the chamber had delegates who were older than human civilization itself. "Let us review what we know," Eth said. His voice was deep and carried easily through the chamber. "The humans have been part of the galactic community for only 63 years. In that time, they have established 14 colony worlds. Their technology is adequate but unremarkable. Their ships are slower than ours. Their weapons still rely on chemical propellants and kinetic impact." A wet, bubbling laugh came from the section. Their ambassador, a creature that looked like a twisted mass of muscle and teeth, leaned forward in his tank. "They are prey," he said. "Nothing more. The council wastes its time discussing them." Several delegates murmured in agreement. The Florian ambassador, a tall being made of living wood and flowering vines, simply shook her head slowly. She had seen species like humanity before: small, weak, forgotten within a generation of their destruction. But Eth held up one of his 4 hands. "Before we make any decisions, I would like complete information. We should know exactly what we are discussing." He turned to the far end of the chamber, where a single figure sat in shadow: the archivist. It was an ancient synthetic being, older than most civilizations in the room. Its body was a collection of floating geometric shapes that hummed with quiet energy. It had access to every battle record, every military engagement, every death in the known galaxy for the past 12,000 years. "Archivist," Eth said, "I want a standard military assessment of human ground forces, specifically their Marines." The archivist's shapes rotated. "Specify parameters." "Kill ratio," Eth said simply. "What is the expected enemy casualty count for a single human Marine before that Marine is killed or disabled? Standard engagement conditions." It was a common question. Kill ratios told you everything you needed to know about a species' military value. Soldiers averaged 62 kills before death. Shock troops averaged 44. The peaceful Concordat averaged only 12, which was why they relied on diplomacy instead of war. A low number would prove the right. Humanity would be classified as prey, their colonies written off as acceptable losses, and the galaxy would move on without them. The chamber waited. The archivist did not respond. 1 second passed, then 2, then 5. Eth's antennae twitched. He had never seen the archivist hesitate. It processed information faster than thought. A delay of even 1 second was unusual. 10 seconds passed, 15. The delegate made a concerned gurgling sound. "Is it malfunctioning?" "No," the archivist said finally. Its voice was flat, mechanical, but something in its tone made Eth's shell itch. "I am processing. The data is unusual. Unusual how? Eth asked. I require clarification, the archivist said. The kill ratios for human Marines vary significantly based on engagement type. Which parameters would you like me to use? Open field combat, urban warfare, defensive positions, boarding actions. Eth waved a hand. All of them. Give me an average across all recorded engagements. Another pause. 17 seconds this time. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. There is an additional complication, the archivist said. Human Marines do not surrender when logically expected to. This affects casualty calculations significantly. The ambassador laughed again. All species say they do not surrender. All species do when the situation is hopeless. It is simple mathematics. Dead soldiers cannot fight. Living prisoners can be exchanged. Even the surrender when defeat is certain. This is true, Eth admitted. He had surrendered once himself early in his career when his hive ship was destroyed and his soldiers were floating helpless in space. It was the logical choice, the honorable choice. Human Marines do not follow this pattern, the archivist said. In 93% of recorded engagements where human commanders transmitted official surrender orders, Marine ground units continued fighting until physically incapable of continuing. The chamber went quiet. They disobeyed orders, the Florian ambassador asked, her leaves rustling with surprise. Not disobeyed, the archivist corrected. In many cases, they followed specific standing orders that supersede general surrender commands. Human Marines operate under a doctrine they call fight until relieved or destroyed. They interpret surrender orders as suggestions. Eth leaned forward. This was not normal. This was not how civilized species waged war. Surrender was a tool, a way to preserve lives and resources for future conflicts. Only animals fought to the death every time. Give me an example, he said. The archivist's shape spun, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a small moon and lifeless, with a single human colony on its surface. New Manila, the archivist said. 17 months ago, a raiding force landed to capture the colonial spaceport. They deployed 800 shock troops. The human garrison consisted of 1 Marine. How many is the delegate asked. 17, the archivist said. Silence. 17 Marines, the archivist continued, held the spaceport for 19 hours against 800 shock troops. They were ordered to surrender after the first hour. They did not comply. They were ordered to surrender again after the 6th hour, when reinforcements were confirmed to be impossible. They did not comply. The display showed the battle unfolding. Red markers for blue markers for humans. The red markers swarmed forward. The blue markers held. On hour 16, the Marines exhausted their ammunition supplies, the archivist said. Standard military doctrine would call for surrender at this point. Instead, they transitioned to improvised weapons and hand-to-hand combat. The ambassador stopped laughing. What happened? Eth asked quietly. 14 Marines survived until evacuation ships arrived, the archivist said. Casualties totaled 612. 43 were killed during the hand-to-hand phase. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over each other. The representatives' chromatophores flashed wildly. Even the normally calm Florians were whispering urgently among themselves. Eth raised all 4 arms for silence. His mind was racing. The numbers didn't make sense. 17 soft, squishy humans against 800 killers. It should have been a slaughter. It was a slaughter, just not the kind anyone expected. He looked at the archivist. You said this data was unusual. Is this engagement an outlier, an exception? The archivist's shape spun slowly. No, High Admiral, this engagement is consistent with the pattern. What pattern? The pattern where human Marines consistently exceed expected casualty ratios by a factor of 4 to 11, depending on circumstances. The pattern where they refuse surrender at rates unprecedented in galactic military history. The pattern where they become more dangerous when cornered, not less. The archivist paused. "I have seen this pattern once before," it said. "In a species that no longer exists. Your ancestors destroyed them, High Admiral, because they could not be conquered." Eth felt something he had not felt in 200 years of warfare. Fear. The chamber had not calmed down. Delegates were still arguing, still shouting, still trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Eth let them talk. He needed time to think. 17 Marines against 800. 600 enemy dead. It was impossible. It went against everything he understood about warfare, about biology, about the simple mathematics of combat. And yet the archivist did not lie. It could not lie. Its purpose was to record and report, nothing more. "Silence," Eth finally said. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. The chamber went quiet. "Archivist, you said New Manila was consistent with a pattern. Show us more." The holographic display shifted. A new world appeared, this one covered in ice and snow. Mountains rose like broken teeth against a pale sky. "The Battle of Frost," the archivist said. 11 months ago, a ground force of 2,000 troops attempted to capture a human mining facility. The facility was defended by 44 Marines and approximately 200 civilian workers. The delegate made a sound of disbelief. "Civilians. Civilians do not fight. They evacuate or they die. This is known." "Human civilians do not follow this pattern," the archivist said. "When evacuation became impossible, the civilian workers requested weapons from the Marine commander. They received them." The display showed the battle. Red markers flowing down the mountain passes, blue markers holding at the facility, green markers appeared among the blue, the civilians. The Marines taught basic combat techniques to the workers during the 3 hours before they arrived, the archivist continued. When the attack began, the Marines held the primary defensive positions while the civilians provided supporting fire and ammunition supply. "This is madness," the ambassador snarled. "Untrained workers cannot fight. They die, they run, they surrender." 14 civilian workers died during the battle, the archivist said. "None ran, none surrendered. Casualties totaled 1,473. The facility was held for 6 days until reinforcements arrived." The numbers hung in the air. Eth did the math in his head. 44 Marines and 200 untrained civilians had destroyed more than 70% of a professional military force. It was not possible. It should not be possible. "Show us more," he said. The display changed again. A space station this time, spinning slowly in orbit around a red dwarf star. "Station," the archivist said. 8 months ago, a boarding party of 300 attempted to capture the station and its crew of 73. 26 of those crew members were Marines serving as security forces. "A boarding action," Eth said. He knew boarding actions well. They were brutal, close-quarters affairs. Warriors excelled at them because of their natural armor and multiple limbs. "The station commander ordered a general evacuation," the archivist said. 47 civilian crew members reached escape pods. The 26 Marines remained behind. "To cover the evacuation," the Florian ambassador said. "This is standard procedure. Hold the enemy while others escape, then surrender when the mission is complete." "The Marines did not surrender," the archivist said. "After the civilians escaped, they sealed the station and systematically eliminated the boarding party." "Systematically?" Eth asked. The display zoomed in. The station's corridors appeared, mapped in precise detail. The archivist began marking positions. "The Marines divided into 2-person teams," it explained. "They moved through the station's maintenance tunnels and ventilation systems. They attacked from unexpected angles. They set traps using station equipment. They disabled lighting and artificial gravity in specific sections. Red markers began to disappear from the display, one by one, then in groups. The boarding party commander reported increasing casualties for the first 4 hours, the archivist said. He requested reinforcements at hour 3. By hour 5, he stopped transmitting entirely. What happened to him? The ambassador demanded. Unknown, the archivist said. His body was found in a storage compartment 3 days later. Cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon used appears to have been a fire extinguisher. The chamber went silent again. A fire extinguisher. The Marines had run out of proper weapons and beaten enemy soldiers to death with emergency equipment. Total casualties from the station engagement, the archivist continued, were 300. Total Marine casualties were 11. The surviving 15 Marines held the station until relief forces arrived 2 days later. Ev's antennae were completely flat against his head now. This was the posture his species took when facing a serious threat. He had not assumed this posture in decades. "You call this engagement the station massacre," he said slowly. "I assumed when I first saw that name that it referred to a massacre of humans." "That assumption was incorrect," the archivist said. The display changed once more. A planet this time green and brown with heavy cloud cover. "IV," the archivist said. 6 months ago, the largest ground engagement between human and forces to date. Command committed 15,000 troops to capture the planetary capital. Human forces totaled approximately 800 Marines and 3,000 colonial militia. "Now we will see reality," the ambassador said. He sounded confident, but his voice was not as strong as before. 15,000 trained soldiers against 800 of these Marines and some farmers with guns. This is where your data will show the truth. The engagement lasted 17 days, the archivist said. Forces eventually captured the capital on day 15. However, organized Marine resistance continued in the surrounding area until evacuation was completed on day 17. "Casualties?" Ed asked. "Casualties totaled 9,612, the archivist said. Human Marine casualties were 544. Colonial militia casualties were approximately 1,800. The math was simple. The humans had traded roughly 2,300 soldiers for nearly 10,000 enemies. A kill ratio of more than 4-to-1, even in a losing battle, even against overwhelming numbers. "This is impossible," the ambassador said. His voice was quiet now. "Our soldiers are stronger, faster, more numerous. We have conquered 100 worlds. We do not lose like this." "Your soldiers are individually superior to human Marines in most physical categories," the archivist agreed. "They are stronger, faster, and more resistant to damage. They also surrender when faced with certain death, which allows them to fight again another day. This is logical. This is efficient." The archivist paused. "Human Marines do not surrender when faced with certain death. When they know they are going to die, they do not attempt to preserve their lives. They attempt to maximize damage to the enemy before death occurs. This is not logical. It is not efficient, but it is extremely effective." A new set of data appeared on the display. Charts, graphs, numbers that Eth understood all too well. "In engagements where human Marines believe death is inevitable," the archivist said, "their combat effectiveness increases by an average of 47%. They take greater risks. They ignore wounds that would disable soldiers of other species. They continue fighting with injuries that should render them unconscious." "How is this possible?" the Florian ambassador asked. "Pain is pain. Damage is damage. Biology does not change simply because one believes death is coming." "Human biology includes several unusual features," the archivist said. Their bodies produce chemicals called adrenaline and endorphins in response to extreme stress. These chemicals temporarily increase strength, reduce pain sensation, and enhance focus. Additionally, human psychology includes a phenomenon they call going down fighting. Cultural and individual values often override survival instincts. Values override survival. The delegates' chromatophores flashed in confusion. This does not make sense. Survival is the primary biological drive. Nothing overrides survival. For most species, this is correct, the archivist said. Humans are an exception. They regularly choose death over outcomes they consider unacceptable. Historical records show they have done this throughout their existence, long before they achieved space travel. The display filled with images, humans from different eras, different cultures, different wars. All of them had one thing in common: they had chosen to die rather than surrender. They have a phrase, the archivist said, death before dishonor. For humans, this is not simply a saying. It is a genuine decision-making principle. Eth stared at the images. He had conquered 37 worlds. He had fought dozens of species. He had never encountered anything like this. Archivist, he said slowly, you mentioned earlier that my ancestors destroyed a species with similar patterns. Which species? The archivist said. They inhabited a region of space approximately 3,000 light years from here. They were eliminated approximately 4,000 years ago. I know the name, Eth said. We do not speak of them. Our histories say only that they were a threat that had to be removed. They refused to surrender, the archivist said. They fought until extinction. The war lasted 300 years and cost the Empire 42% of its total military force at the time. 42%. Nearly half of his ancestors' military, destroyed by a single species that simply refused to stop fighting. They had advanced technology, Eth said. They had natural armor and psychic abilities. They were a genuine threat. Correct, the archivist said. Humans have none of these advantages. They are physically inferior to thee in every measurable way. Then how? Eth began. Their will to fight appears to be equivalent, the archivist said. Perhaps greater. They fought because their biology demanded it. Humans fight because they choose to. This distinction may be significant. The chamber was completely silent now. Every delegate understood what they were hearing. They were looking at data that suggested humanity might be the most dangerous species to emerge in 4,000 years. And someone had just declared war on them. The holographic displays had been running for 3 hours now, battle after battle, engagement after engagement. The data was always the same. Human Marines fought harder than they should. They died slower than they should. And they took far more enemies with them than any reasonable calculation could predict. Eth had stopped counting individual examples. The pattern was clear. Now he needed the final answer. Archivist, he said, enough examples. Give me the number. 1 human Marine, standard equipment, average engagement conditions. What is the expected kill count before that Marine is terminated? The chamber went quiet. This was the question they had started with 3 hours ago. Now, after everything they had seen, the answer felt much more important. Calculating, the archivist said. Adjusting for equipment variance, environmental factors, opposition force type, and engagement duration. 5 seconds passed, 10. In open field combat, the archivist said, the average human Marine accounts for 47 enemy casualties before death or incapacitation. Eth nodded slowly. 47 was high, higher than shock troops, not quite as high as warriors but impressive for such a physically weak species. In defensive positions, the archivist continued, this number rises to 143. The delegate made a choking sound. 143. That was more than double the average. In urban or enclosed environments, the archivist said, the average increases further to 297. Now the entire chamber was reacting. Delegates were speaking to each other in urgent whispers. The Florian ambassador had gone completely still, her leaves frozen in place. "How is this possible?" the ambassador demanded. "These numbers cannot be accurate. No species produces warriors capable of killing 300 enemies before dying, not without advanced technology, not without natural advantages." "The numbers are accurate," the archivist said. "Human Marines achieve these results through a combination of factors. First, their training is extensive. The average Marine undergoes 3 years of continuous combat preparation before deployment. Second, their tactical doctrine emphasizes flexibility and independent decision-making. Marine units can adapt to changing conditions without waiting for orders. Our soldiers are also trained," the ambassador argued. "Your soldiers are trained to follow orders," the archivist corrected. "Human Marines are trained to think. They are taught to analyze situations, identify weaknesses, and exploit them without guidance. When communications are lost, units become confused and disorganized. When communications are lost, Marine units become more dangerous because they no longer feel any restrictions on their actions." "There must be more," Eth said. "Training alone cannot explain these numbers." "There is more," the archivist agreed. "Human Marines operate under a principle they call violence of action. When they engage an enemy, they do not hold back. They do not probe or test. They attack with maximum force immediately. This creates psychological shock in opposing forces, even those who are numerically superior." The display showed a brief video. Human Marines breaching a door. The speed was incredible. They moved through the opening before the door had fully opened, weapons firing before their feet touched the ground on the other side. "Additionally," the archivist said, "Human Marines are trained in what they call combat stress inoculation. They are deliberately exposed to extreme physical and psychological stress during training. This reduces the impact of fear and pain during actual combat. All warriors are trained to handle stress," the ambassador said, but his voice was weaker now. "Not like this," the archivist said. "During training, human Marines are deprived of sleep for days. They are forced to perform complex tasks while exhausted, cold, hungry, and under simulated fire. They are trained until these conditions become normal. Where soldiers of other species experience degraded performance under combat stress, human Marines experience only minimal reduction." Eth absorbed this information. He had heard of harsh training before, that had harsh training, but he had never heard of a species that deliberately broke its own soldiers and then rebuilt them into something harder. "There is one more factor," the archivist said, "perhaps the most significant." "Tell us," Eth said. "When ammunition is exhausted and no weapons are available, the average human Marine continues to engage in combat. Using improvised weapons, or no weapons at all, they account for an additional 12 to 31 casualties before being killed." The chamber exploded into noise again. The ambassador was shouting something about lies and impossible data. The delegates were changing colors so fast they looked like they were flickering. Even the usually calm Florians were making sounds of distress. "They fight with their hands," Eth asked quietly. His voice was lost in the chaos, but the archivist heard him. "Yes," the archivist said. "Human Marines are trained in multiple forms of unarmed combat. They are also trained to identify and use any available object as a weapon: rocks, pieces of debris, tools, emergency equipment. In several recorded engagements, Marines have killed enemies using nothing but their bare hands and teeth." "Teeth," Eth repeated. He thought about with their armored bodies and multiple claws. He thought about his own species with their hard shells and 4 powerful arms. And he thought about humans, soft and small and weak, biting their enemies to death. It was horrifying. It was primitive. It was the most frightening thing he had heard in 200 years. "I have one more question," Eth said. The chamber gradually quieted to hear him. You have given us data on standard Marines, but humans have elite units, special forces. They call them by different names: Raiders, SEALs, Force Recon. What are their kill ratios? The archivist paused. This pause was longer than any of the others. That data is incomplete, it finally said. Incomplete, Eth frowned. You have access to every battle record in the galaxy. How can the data be incomplete? Human governments classify information about their special forces, the archivist explained. Records are sealed, details are hidden. Much of what I know comes from observed outcomes rather than direct reporting. Then tell us what you have observed. The display changed. A small moon appeared in Rocky, orbiting a gas giant. Research Station 7, the archivist said. 4 months ago. Intelligence indicated the station was developing biological weapons intended for use against human colony worlds. A human special forces team was deployed to neutralize the threat. How many humans? Eth asked. 6. And the station complement? 312, including 47 armed security personnel. Eth felt his antennae flatten again. 6 against more than 300. Even with the data they had seen today, those odds seemed impossible. What happened? The station went silent, the archivist said. No communications, no distress signals. 3 days later, a patrol ship arrived to investigate. They found the station intact. All computer systems had been wiped. The biological weapons laboratory had been destroyed by controlled demolition. And the personnel? Dead, the archivist said simply. All 312. The security team appears to have been eliminated first, followed by the technical staff, followed by the command personnel. The bodies were found in various locations throughout the station. Cause of death varied. Some were shot. Some had their necks broken. Some appeared to have been killed with edged weapons. Edged weapons? The delegate asked. They used swords. Knives, the archivist corrected. Human special forces carry small blades as standard equipment. They are trained to use them for silent elimination of targets. Eth tried to imagine it. 6 humans, moving through a station of 300, killing everyone they encountered without raising an alarm. It sounded like a ghost story, like something parents told children to frighten them. The 6 humans, he said, did they survive? Yes, the archivist said. They were extracted by a human ship 47 hours after the initial insertion. All 6 were recovered alive. 2 had minor injuries. Minor injuries, Eth repeated. They killed 300 enemies, including security forces, and suffered only minor injuries. Correct. And you have no data on their individual kill ratios, because there were no survivors to report. Correct. The ambassador had stopped talking. He sat in his tank, his body very still, watching the holographic display with what might have been fear. There are more examples, the archivist said, but the pattern is consistent. When human special forces are deployed, opposition forces are typically eliminated completely. Survivors are rare. Witnesses are rarer. The humans appear and then they vanish, leaving only bodies behind. How many special forces personnel does humanity have? Eth asked. Estimated total across all branches, approximately 30,000. However, this number may be inaccurate due to the classified nature of these units. 30,000 ghosts. 30,000 soldiers who could apparently walk through enemy installations and kill everyone inside without being stopped. Eth looked around the chamber. He saw fear in the eyes of delegates who had conquered worlds. He saw confusion in species who had never faced a real military threat. He saw the ambassador, who had laughed at humanity 3 hours ago, now sitting in absolute silence. I believe, Eth said slowly, that we need to hear from the humans themselves. Ambassador, would you please address the council? At the far end of the chamber, in a small seat that had been added almost as an afterthought, a human woman stood. She was small, even by human standards. Her hair was. Her face was lined with age. She wore simple diplomatic robes, nothing that suggested military power or threat. She smiled, and something about that smile made Eth deeply uncomfortable. Ambassador Wei walked slowly to the center of the chamber. She moved like someone who had all the time in the world. Her footsteps were quiet on the metal floor. Every eye in the room followed her. She was 63 years old. She had served in the Human Diplomatic Corps for 30 years. Before that, she had been a Marine herself, though she rarely spoke of those days. The scars on her hands told their own story. "Thank you, High Admiral," she said. Her voice was calm and pleasant. "I have been listening to the archivist's presentation with great interest. It seems my species has made quite an impression." "That is one way to describe it," Eth said carefully. "Perhaps you can help us understand what we have seen." "I can try," folded her hands in front of her. "But first, I have a question. How many of you have ever watched a human die?" The chamber was silent. The question seemed strange. Death was common in the galaxy. Every species had seen death. "I don't mean in data or recordings," continued. "I mean in person. Have any of you stood next to a human in their final moments?" No one responded. Humans were rare in the galaxy. Their colonies were far away. Most species had never met a human face to face, let alone watched one die. "Let me tell you what it looks like," said. "When humans die, they think about the people they love. They ask about their families, their friends, their homes. With their last breath, they ask if the people they care about are safe." She paused. "This is true of all humans, farmers, teachers, children, but it is especially true of Marines. A dying Marine will ask one question above all others: did I give the others enough time to get away?" The ambassador stirred in his tank. "This is sentiment. It explains nothing about the combat data we have seen." "You're wrong," said. Her voice was still pleasant, but something hard had entered it. "It explains everything. You have made a mistake, Ambassador. All of you have made a mistake. You look at humans and see small, weak creatures, short lives, soft bodies, no armor, no claws." She smiled again, that unsettling smile. "You think these things make us prey, but you have it backwards. These things are precisely why we are dangerous." "Explain," Eth said. Walked to the holographic display and touched a control. The battle data disappeared. In its place, images of Earth appeared: forests, oceans, mountains, cities. "Our world was not kind to us," she said. "We evolved on a planet full of predators, things with claws and fangs and venom. We had none of these weapons. We should have been food." The images changed. Ancient humans, small and fragile, huddled around fires in the darkness. "But we survived. Do you know how? Not through strength, not through speed, through stubbornness, through cooperation, through the absolute refusal to give up, even when giving up was the logical choice." The images changed again. Human history compressed into moments: armies marching through snow, ships crossing stormy oceans, soldiers crawling through mud and fire. "You mentioned said to Eth, a species that fought your ancestors for 300 years. You destroyed them because they could not be conquered, but they fought because their biology demanded it. They had no choice." She turned to face the full chamber. "We have a choice. Every human who picks up a weapon and stands between their home and an enemy has made a choice. They have looked at the odds, they have seen the danger, and they have decided that some things are worth dying for." The delegates' chromatophores flickered. "This does not make sense. If you know you will die, why fight? What is the purpose?" "Purpose?" laughed softly. "You want to know our purpose. We don't fight to survive. We fight so that others will survive. Every Marine who holds a position 1 minute longer than expected is buying time. Time for civilians to escape. Time for reinforcements to arrive. Time for their families to get to safety." She pulled up new images. Not battles this time. Families, children playing, couples holding hands, old people laughing together. This is what we protect, said. Not territory, not resources, not pride, people. Every Marine knows they might die. They accept this. But they also know that their death will mean something. It will give someone else a chance to live. A chance, the Florian ambassador repeated. You speak of death as though it is currency. It is, said, the most valuable currency we have, and we spend it freely in defense of what we love. The chamber was silent. Eth tried to imagine it, a species that treated death as a payment, a species that looked at certain destruction and said, yes, but what can I buy with my life? You think of war as mathematics, continued. Resources and ratios, logistics and probabilities. This is wise, it is efficient, but it is also your weakness. Our weakness, the ambassador growled. Yes, because when you calculate that surrender is the logical option, you surrender. When you calculate that a position cannot be held, you retreat. When you calculate that a battle is lost, you stop fighting. His voice had become very quiet. We don't. We look at your calculations and we say, those numbers are not high enough. You have not made this expensive enough. We will hold this position one more hour. We will fight one more day. We will kill one more enemy before we fall. She looked directly at the ambassador. And eventually, you will decide that victory costs more than it is worth. That is how we win, not by being stronger, not by being faster, by being more expensive to kill than you can afford. The ambassador said nothing. I want to show you something, said. She touched the controls again. A new document appeared on the display. It was simple text, written in human language with translations floating beside it. This is a letter, said, written by a Marine named James 3 hours before he died defending New Manila. He knew he was going to die. He had time to evacuate. He chose to stay. She read aloud. Sarah, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I'm sorry. I wanted to come home. I wanted to see you and the kids again. But there are civilian transports trying to launch and someone needs to hold the spaceport long enough for them to get clear. I can do that. Maybe I'm the only one who can, so I'm going to stay. Tell the kids that their father died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tell them that's what Marines do. We stand between the darkness and the light. We hold the line. And when we fall, others rise to take our place. I love you. I'll see you again, somewhere beyond the stars, James. Lowered her hand. The letter remained on the display. James held his position for 6 hours after writing this letter, she said. He killed 47 enemy soldiers. He bought enough time for 12 civilian transports to escape, carrying more than 2,000 people. He was shot 14 times before he finally stopped moving. The chamber was utterly silent. 14 times, repeated. The medical report said he was probably unconscious after the 8th shot. His body kept fighting. His hands were still gripping his weapon when they found him. She looked around the chamber, meeting each delegate's eyes in turn. This is what you are facing. Not soldiers who fight for pay or territory or political power. Soldiers who fight for letters like this one, for families, for the chance that someone they love will see another sunrise. You are saying, Eth spoke slowly, that your Marines are motivated by love. Yes. And this makes them dangerous. Smile, this time the smile was sad. High Admiral, there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a human who has something to protect and nothing to lose. James knew he was going to die, so he stopped thinking about survival. He started thinking about how many enemies he could take with him, how much time he could buy, how many lives he could save with his death. She turned back to the full chamber. You have seen our kill ratios. You have heard the numbers, but you still don't understand what they mean. Every number on those charts represents a human who decided that dying was acceptable as long as their death served a purpose. Her voice hardened. They have declared war on our colonies. They think they will conquer us because they have more ships and more soldiers, but they have miscalculated. They have not counted the cost. 3 million Marines, High Admiral. 3 million humans who have already made peace with death, who are not afraid of dying, who will spend their lives like water to protect what they love. She paused. And that is why your kill ratios are so high. It is not that we are hard to kill. It is that we refuse to die quietly. The letter from James still glowed on the display. Somewhere in the chamber, a delegate was quietly weeping. Even Eth felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he could not identify. Ambassador returned to her seat. She moved slowly, like a grandmother, like someone who posed no threat to anyone. But every delegate in the chamber now understood what she was. She was a warning. Eth called for a recess. The chamber emptied slowly as delegates retreated to private rooms to discuss what they had heard. The archivist's data still floated in the air, numbers and charts that told a story no one had expected. Eth stood alone at the center of the chamber, staring at the holographic display. His mind was working through calculations, possibilities, outcomes. He had been a military commander for 200 years. He had never faced a decision like this one. The door behind him opened. He did not turn. He knew who it was by the sound of movement through water. "High Admiral," the ambassador said. His voice was lower now, more private. "I would speak with you." "Speak then." The moved forward, his body sliding through the liquid in his travel tank. "The data is concerning, I admit, but the humans are still few. 14 colonies, 10 billion individuals. We have 200 billion soldiers across our empire. Simple mathematics says we can afford the losses." Eth finally turned. His compound eyes studied the carefully. "You believe this?" "I believe it. Yes, the humans will fight hard. Yes, we will suffer casualties. But in the end, numbers win wars. This has always been true." "They did not believe in numbers," Eth said quietly. "They believed in will. My ancestors destroyed them, but it took 300 years and cost us nearly half our military strength. We have never fully recovered. They had technology and natural advantages. The humans have nothing. The humans have exactly what they had: the willingness to die rather than surrender, the ability to make every victory cost more than it is worth." Eth turned back to the display. "Tell me, Ambassador, how many soldiers will you sacrifice for 14 colony worlds?" There was silence for a moment. "As many as necessary." "Let us calculate." Eth touched the controls. Numbers appeared in the air. "The humans have approximately 3 million Marines. If even half of them live up to the archivist's data and they are forced into defensive positions." He let the calculation run. The number that appeared was enormous. 400 million casualties, Eth said. Minimum. And that assumes you can pin them down and prevent guerrilla warfare, which the data suggests is unlikely. In urban combat, fighting building to building, street to street, the number doubles. "We have 200 billion soldiers," they said, but his voice wavered. "You will need them, because after you finish conquering the 14 colonies, you will need to occupy them. The humans do not accept conquest. The archivist's records show that they fight as civilians when their military is destroyed. They resist. They sabotage. They make occupation so expensive that conquerors eventually leave." Eth turned to face the directly. "You will not be conquering worlds, Ambassador. You will be buying them, and the price will be 40% of your military strength, perhaps more." They said nothing. "And when you are done," Eth continued, "when your fleets are broken and your armies are bleeding across a dozen occupied worlds that hate you, my people will be waiting, as will the Concordat, the Florians, the Synthetic Collective, everyone you have bullied and threatened and intimidated for the past 100 years. You would not dare. I would not need to dare. You would be weak. We would be strong. Mathematics." The ambassador's body pulsed with color changes: fear, anger, uncertainty. Finally, he turned and moved back toward the door. "This is not over," he said. "No," Eth agreed. "It is not, but it will be decided today." The recess lasted 3 hours. When the delegates returned, the chamber felt different. The fear had not faded. If anything, it had grown. But there was something else now, something that looked like respect. Eth took his position at the center of the chamber. He looked around at the assembled species, the representatives of 1,000 worlds and 100 civilizations. "We have heard the data," he said. "We have heard the humans explain their nature. Now we must decide what to do." "The Empire has a proposal," said a voice behind him. Eth turned. His own second-in-command admiral had risen from her seat. "If I may, High Admiral." Eth nodded. "Touch the controls." A new document appeared on the display. It was a treaty, written in legal language that any species could understand. "The Empire proposes a mutual defense pact with the Human Systems Alliance," she said. "Any attack on human territory will be considered an attack on territory. Any enemy of humanity will be considered an enemy of the Empire." The chamber erupted. The ambassador was shouting. Other delegates were speaking over each other. The noise was overwhelming. Eth raised all 4 arms for silence. Slowly, the chamber quieted. "You are surprised," he said. "You think we are being charitable. You think we are being sentimental." He let out a sound that might have been laughter. "We are being intelligent." He gestured to the display, where human kill ratios still glowed. "I have fought wars for 200 years. I have conquered 37 worlds. I know what makes a species valuable in combat, and I am telling you now, humanity is the most valuable military asset to emerge in 4,000 years." He pointed at the section. "You want to destroy them. You want to conquer their worlds and take their resources. This is short-term thinking, foolish thinking. Because if you succeed, you will have thrown away something priceless." "What?" the ambassador demanded. "What could these soft, short-lived creatures possibly offer?" "Allies," Eth said simply. 3 million warriors who will stand beside you even when all hope is lost, who will hold positions that cannot be held, who will buy time with their lives so that your soldiers can survive, who will never, ever stop fighting until the battle is won or they are physically unable to continue." He looked around the chamber. Every empire wants allies like this. Every military commander dreams of soldiers like this. And here they are, right in front of us, and you want to destroy them. The ambassador had no response. "The Empire chooses differently," Eth said. "We choose to stand with humanity, not because we are kind, not because we are generous, because we are wise enough to recognize value when we see it." The vote took less than an hour. The Concordat joined the pact. The Florian Alliance joined. The Synthetic Collective joined. One by one, species added their names to the treaty until nearly 2/3 of the chamber had committed. Their declaration of war 3 days later, they claimed it was a diplomatic misunderstanding. No one believed them. No one cared. The war was over before it began. Ambassador watched the final signatures being added to the treaty. She had not spoken since her address to the council. Now, as the delegates filed out, a young officer approached her. "Ambassador," he said, his voice was uncertain, almost shy. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "The High Admiral believes your species is valuable because of your military abilities, but I listened to your speech, the letter from the dying Marine, the way you spoke of love and protection and sacrifice." He hesitated. "Is that truly why humans fight? For love?" Smiled. It was a warm smile, with no hardness in it at all. "Yes," she said, "that is truly why we fight." "Then you are fighting the wrong battles," the officer said. He seemed confused. "Military conflict is about territory and resources and power. Love has nothing to do with it." "Perhaps that is true for your species," said gently. "For us, every battle is about love. even when we are fighting far from home, even when we are fighting for strangers. We fight because we love life. We love freedom. We love the people we have never met who will live in peace because we stood between them and the darkness." The officer was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed in the fashion and walked away. Eth was waiting by the chamber exit. He watched approach with his compound eyes. "That was a good speech," he said. "I am curious whether you believe it or whether it was simply effective diplomacy." Laughed. "High Admiral, I was a Marine for 8 years before I became a diplomat. Everything I said was true." "You fought." "I fought." She held up her hands, showing the scars. "These are from a knife fight on a moon that no longer has a name. I killed 3 enemies with my hands before someone pulled me off the 4th one." Eth studied her, this small, old-haired woman. I would not have guessed. "No one ever does." Started walking toward the exit. "That is part of our advantage, I think. We do not look dangerous, we look like prey." "But you are not prey." Stopped, she turned back to face him. "High Admiral, when I was young, my Hive father told me about a creature from Earth," she said, echoing his earlier words. "A small creature, soft, builds its home in walls and trees. Individually it is nothing. You could crush it between your fingers." Eth's antennae rose. "You know about the bees." "We know about ourselves," said. "We have always known what we are. A species of builders and dreamers and lovers who will sting you until our bodies break if you threaten our hive." She smiled one last time. "Welcome to the Alliance, High Admiral. I think we are going to be very good friends." She walked away, disappearing into the crowd of departing delegates. Eth watched her go. Behind him, the young officer returned. "High Admiral, the ambassador is requesting a meeting. He wishes to discuss terms." "Tell him to wait," Eth said. He was still watching the door where had disappeared. "I am thinking." "About what, sir?" Eth remembered the archivist's words. The species that no longer exists. The war that lasted 300 years. The cost that his ancestors had paid to destroy creatures who could not be conquered. "I am thinking," he said slowly, "that we just did the thing the Empire has done in 4,000 years. We looked at a beehive and instead of striking it, we offered it flowers." "I do not understand, sir." "You will." Eth turned away from the door. "Someday, when you see humans fight beside us instead of against us, you will understand." The young officer remained silent, confused but trusting. And in the vastness of space, across 14 small colony worlds, 3 million Marines continued their training, continued their preparation, continued their eternal watch. They did not know about the treaty. They did not know that war had been averted. They only knew what they had always known. That somewhere out there, something threatened the people they loved. And they would be ready. They would always be ready. Because that was what Marines did.